right, let's go ahead and move on to some very serious topics with regard to Israel. Put this first report up on the screen. So we're still trying to figure out, what the hell happened with Iran, what's likely to happen in the future with Iran, how this all unfolded. New York Times has a report. Take it with a grain of salt because it's frankly very flattering to the Biden administration. So good to keep that in mind. But the headline here is Israel planned a bigger attack on Iran, but scaled it back to avoid war. The strike on Iran on Friday was originally intended to be much broader in scope, but after intense pressure from allies, Biden being one of the key people that they talk about here, Israeli leaders agreed to ratchet it down. The story they tell, for what it's worth, and Saagar, I'm interested to hear your read on this, is that basically, the Israelis are trying to sell this line that they had no idea Iran would be so upset over us bombing your embassy and taking out your top military commanders. That's bullshit. There is no way these people didn't know that this was a big deal and a massive escalation, okay? So then the Iranian retaliatory attack, while it caused next to no damage because everything was effectively shot down with very few things that actually got through, it was in its breadth much larger than originally anticipated, again, according to this article. And so immediately afterwards, the War Cabinet had planned a much more aggressive response, and one that they had planned to do basically instantaneously. And then the report says Bibi talked to Biden and he was kind of talked down from immediately doing that, put some time, and then did the more limited strike, which allowed Iran to save enough face to sort of, it appears, back away from this conflict. Although, we're taking some of the fallout here because our troops are now, once again, our service members in the region are now once again under fire from, Iranian affiliated proxy groups. So in any case, this is the story that the New York Times has to tell, that President Biden was the hero here and talked Israel out of making the situation, which was already incredibly dangerous, even worse than it already is.
Yeah, what we can actually see also is that they talked about this, quote, huge offensive operation that was going to be carried out. Again, also, if the Iranian strike had materialized, initially they actually believed somehow that Iran had planned to attack with a swarm of large drones, up to 10 ballistic missiles. Their Israeli and military leaders had all agreed on a massive counterstrike. Some of this was eventually pared back by the U.S., but I would note a couple of things here. So it does turn out that we do have some influence with these folks whenever we want to use it, whenever it comes to Iran. But second, also, do not underestimate the warmongering-like nature of a lot of the people inside the military establishment and political establishment inside of Israel. They were ready basically to push the red button and drag the entire world into a world war. It's only because America tried to push it back down a little bit and got them to do what they want to do that we have somewhat of a release valve. But don't be so sure that we'll be in control there in the future. This is a very, very dangerous situation.
To me, this lends credence to the report we brought you yesterday that was from an Israeli TV outlet that Biden was basically like, all right, fine, you can do your Rafah invasion if you do a more limited attack on Iran. If this report is true, I think it fits together with, so what did Biden say in that conversation that really persuaded Bibi? And, that was, I guess, the leverage rather than withholding weapons or doing any of the things we would want him to do. Instead, he's like, how about I sacrifice the Palestinians in Rafah and, make you feel good about that. And then you can do this more limited strike. So to me, that seems to be the picture that's coming into focus. So we covered yesterday, there have already been some strikes in Rafah, 2 strikes that killed 22 people, 18 children, 3 women and 1 man, including one of the women was pregnant. They had to cut the baby from her belly. Thank God they were actually able to save this premature infant. But that's the picture of what's going on there. We also have some important Israeli domestic political news. Let's put this up on the screen. So the head of Israel's military intelligence has actually resigned over failures in anticipating and planning for the October 7th attack. He said, Major General Haran Haliva said in his resignation letter that he took responsibility for the military intelligence failings that preceded Hamas's attack, which is widely regarded as the worst security failure in the Jewish state's 76-year history. He also called for an official investigation to be carried out. And they say that this departure is, quote, widely expected to be followed by further resignations among Israel's military intelligence leadership, with several other senior officials having admitted failings in the run-up to Hamas's attack. And it's also expected, Saagar, to increase some pressure on Netanyahu himself to admit some mistakes or launch this long-anticipated investigation into what the hell went wrong in anticipating October 7th. Because I don't know if you guys remember these details, but multiple confirmed reports at this point have come out saying, yeah, they saw them planning. They actually had the attack plans, and we're just like, they're not going to do it. We don't think they're going to do anything. So, and specifically with regard to Bibi and his coalition, they had moved some of the IDF units that would have been in that nearby the Gaza Strip part of Israel to protect these, settler maniacs in the West Bank to, appease Ben-Gvir and his people. And so that's part of why not only they failed to anticipate, but then the response was horrible. It took hours and hours for, many of these people, innocents who were being slaughtered, to have any official help.
Yeah, it's especially ironic because this means now that Bibi Netanyahu is now the only member of the Israeli military establishment who was there on October 7th who has not taken responsibility for that.
Yeah,
and instead is actually sailing to reestablishing his power. I mean, you have to, in some ways, just respect the cravenness of the man and how good of a politician he is. As you said, already polls are showing some people are like, yeah, it was definitely bad, but he moved past it, and so, we'll rescue him maybe. And yeah, the other side, they have a few points, but he's been working with them by and large, and so maybe we'll keep him, actually. And that's exactly what dragging yourself into a bigger war despite a massive disaster was meant to do in the first place, which is, pretty astounding. And I do think it is genuinely disgusting that in their, democratic society and all that, which they like to brag about all the time, the person at the top who was genuinely responsible at a very deep political level and military level has not had any accountability, while the underlings who, sure, they definitely have some, don't nearly as much as he does, have been allowed to take the fall. It's not right.
The other thing is, his whole thing was Mr. Security. His whole thing was vote for me and I'll keep you safe. Like, your core thesis about how to achieve that was completely wrong. And you were asleep at the switch. And you are out there on the record multiple times talking about how you need to support Hamas. And it's clear the ideology. We need to make sure we have this talking point of there's no partner for peace there. We can't possibly work with Hamas. We need to keep the West Bank and the Gaza Strip divided. We can control the level of the flame, quote unquote. We can go in and quote unquote mow the grass from time to time. That ideology was a complete failure when it comes to his core promise to the electorate being a security prime minister, keeping them safe. That was the core promise. And so the fact that he keeps switching it off, and that's why the war for him politically had to continue, is because he's said, listen, once this is over, then of course we're going to ask all the hard questions. There's going to be accountability. We're going to look into this, et cetera. And so part of the motivation to keep this thing going is because you postpone indefinitely that reckoning, hope memories fade, hope people feel different, hope you can bring them some sort of, quote unquote victory that they find satisfactory, that they forgive and forget. The failures leading up to October 7th, that's the game he's playing. And so far, frankly, he's played it with regards to the Israeli domestic population very well, and also played Joe Biden and the U.S. political class like a fiddle as well.
Very true.
All right, let's get into the very latest atrocities discovered in the Gaza Strip. So you'll recall there was an all-out assault on the city of Khan Yunis. Now people are finally returning to that city, and we're getting a sense of what the hell happened there. The devastation and annihilation is just, there are no words for it. And the latest discoveries are some of the most horrifying I've seen. You put this up on the screen. You've had multiple mass graves now uncovered by the Gaza Civil Defense Agency in Khan Yunis. They're saying, and mainstream media outlets are by and large not able to get in the Gaza Strip, but they're confirming in the best way they can that you've had somewhere around 283 bodies, hundreds of bodies discovered decomposing in these mass graves. One of them was, one of the large ones was by Nasser Hospital. It's known that there was intense fighting, shelling, bombing, all the rest in and around that hospital. So we're seeing the horrors here. Reports are this includes, not just men, but women, the elderly, wounded young people with hospital tags still on their arms, children, just an absolutely horrifying scene. CNN had a report. They had a stringer who was able to visit the scene on Sunday. They said that some people had buried their family members around the grounds of the hospital in January as a temporary measure. And then when they returned after the Israeli withdrawal, they found the bodies had been exhumed, apparently because the IDF was using DNA testing to determine whether any of the hostages held in Gaza were among the dead. And then they were dumped in these collective graves, is what they're saying. So just an absolute horror here. And, you know, the other piece of this is there's like a little bit of mainstream discussion about this, but the New York Times in particular, how many stories did they do yesterday about like college protesters and whatever?
Here we can see.
This was nowhere to be found.
I've got 3 in front of me right now, actually, on the front page.
Front page.
Ironically. Let's go ahead and...
They just didn't even cover mass grave with hundreds of bodies. Not worthy of coverage.
Let's put the next one up there on the screen too, because it actually highlights another important thing that you were talking about. There was, if we all recall, a UNRWA review where they say Israel has yet to provide evidence that the staffers are actually terror group members. This was important because this was why the U.S. and several other nations ended up pulling funding from the organization, and it significantly disrupted a lot of the aid that was going into the Gaza Strip. But Krystal, now several months later, you know, they have not been able to provide any evidence both to the United States, to the UN, and to any other large body with evidence that they had initially claimed in a so-called dossier to news organizations that have been able to actually be backed up. The UN oversight body that did look into the allegations within there found, you know, what was it, like 12 instances or something like that. But the vast majority of their staff were not involved, and the Israelis have been unable to provide widespread evidence in the organization itself.
To my knowledge, there was no confirmation even of those 12. That was what the Israelis had claimed. They still, this is months later, right? And this is after UNRWA was defunded by some 16 different countries. Now, many of those have come back in, but the U.S. has since passed legislation saying UNRWA is to be defunded at least until 2025, the #1 aid organization on the ground, as we pretend to care about Palestinians starving in the Gaza Strip. So no, they haven't provided any evidence about the 12. They certainly didn't provide, they made this much broader claim of like, oh, there's hundreds of Hamas-affiliated people in UNRWA. They provided no evidence for any of this. The UNRWA investigation has been unable. And by the way, this was led by a former French foreign minister, led this, what they call a neutrality review after Israel alleged that 12 UNRWA staff took part in October 7th. So it wasn't like, you know, an UNRWA staffer, which the Israelis have smeared as being like basically Hamas. It was this attempt to bring in an independent third party who could look at the allegations in a serious way. And you'll recall also, so UNRWA immediately fired the 12 people just based on these allegations, which frankly seems unfair at this point, given that there isn't proof to back it up. And the U.S. immediately, just based on the allegations with no proof, and we saw the thing that was being shopped, the dossier that was being shopped, and that mainstream news outlets like the Wall Street Journal just, you know, printed like a press release effectively with no evidence. So in any case, that's, we immediately, the U.S. immediately, this was right after the ICJ said it's plausible they're committing genocide. On that very same day, we defund UNRWA, helping to further that, that plausible genocide. And now here we are months later. This report will barely be, it won't even be remarked upon by most of the American media or political class. It'll just, like the many other investigations that we're always waiting for the results of, you know, this will barely see the light of day. So that's where we are. I wanted to update you all on something that's unfolding that I think could be very significant. There is an aid flotilla that is attempting to leave from Turkey. Medea Benjamin of Code Pink is among the individuals who is on that aid flotilla. They're attempting to break the blockade of Gaza. This isn't the first time that a similar flotilla of aid has attempted to reach the Gaza Strip. More on that in a moment. I actually interviewed Medea before she left over on Krystal, Kyle and Friends about their goals. Let's take a listen to that.
I am going on a ship that we want to go to Gaza. I don't know if we're going to mention that.
Well, I wasn't sure if it's public yet. What can you tell us?
Yes, we can talk about that,
Yeah,
which
tell
is part of the Freedom Flotilla. And this is a tradition that in the beginning, when it first started, actually a couple of times the boats landed in Gaza. But then after that, the Israelis stopped the boats from going. And in 2010, they actually landed with by air on the boat and killed 10 of the people on board.
I remember that.
The Mavi Marmara. So this year, very soon, actually, we will be leaving very, very soon. And there are many hundreds of us, and we represent people from 30 different countries. And we will be bringing many, many tons of humanitarian goods to Gaza and trying to make it by ship. And of course, we hope that we will make it. We are prepared if we don't make it. I mean, we are totally nonviolent. We hope that the Israelis don't come on board and start shooting people. But we are determined to go because we have to show that a couple of things. One, the Israelis are not letting in humanitarian aid. They are, and they should not be the ones to inspect this aid. We've had other inspectors, and they will come and inspect our boats, but not the Israelis, because they use any excuse to stop the aid from going in, and they don't have the legitimacy to be the ones to inspect that aid. And we want to show that Gaza should have the ability to use their ports, to use, they did have an airport, you know, until the Israelis bombed it, and to be able to come in and out by land. And that's why there is a siege on Gaza. And there was a siege on Gaza way before October 7th. And so we think it's important to try to break the siege of Gaza.
So she refers to the fact that in 2010, the same group, the Freedom Flotilla, is sort of a coalition of groups. They attempted a similar, aid mission with a similar flotilla, and the IDF raided the boat and killed 10 people.
Yeah,
and
that was a big incident.
Massive diplomatic crisis. Let's put this up on the screen from the Washington Post with a few details here. They say Gaza aid flotilla plans to challenge Israeli blockade. The organizers say, they say they're preparing to sail from Turkey in the coming days on a mission aimed at breaching Israel's naval blockade and highlighting the lack of aid reaching Palestinians in the besieged enclave. They go on to say the flotilla's well-traveled route, the Mediterranean, has gained new relevance during the current conflict as governments and relief organizations alike turn to sea deliveries to circumvent what aid groups say is Israel's persistent obstruction of deliveries to Gaza over land. And Saagar, I was able to get in touch with Medea yesterday, and she said I can, share this publicly because I was asking, how are things going? What's the update? How are things looking? And she says, it seems the U.S., Israel, and Germany are pressuring Turkey's Erdogan not to allow the ships to leave Istanbul. We hear the deputy director for counterterrorism from the State Department is here to talk about this. But there's a lot of grassroots pressure in the opposite direction, given that millions of people in Turkey donated money for this mission. We'll see what happens tomorrow, as we're supposed to leave on Wednesday. So this could be potentially very significant because it could really put the U.S., if they're allowed to leave Turkey, which apparently is an if, could really put the U.S. in a very difficult spot here.
Yeah, that's why we're flagging it to everybody, just because we're aware of how crazy the last one went and it caused a major standoff. I remember that very vividly at the time. That was a huge news story, and it took over a lot. It almost broke diplomatic relations to turn into a whole thing. So if this one is allowed to go through, or, which Erdogan, it certainly would be in his political interest to do so. It's not as if, though, the U.S. wouldn't be trying to pressure it behind the scenes to block it as well. But if they find their way over there, everybody tune in, because that is going to be a standoff for the ages. I certainly believe so.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.